think of this as an experiment. I went up to one of my favorite places to screw around with my Cub, and I set up cameras, and one of my cameras failed as usual. I hate GoPros. Anyway, I got to buy some new cameras because this is just ridiculous. Half the time I lose my footage and I'm just sick and tired of it. But I'd spent $1,000 on these cameras and was trying to make the best of it. GoPro sucks. They don't give you any help. And so maybe I'll make a video of smashing GoPro cameras. Anyway, that would be destructive, and I don't want to be destructive, so I won't do that. I'm going to try a little different format here. Think of this as Greg's podcast with nobody interviewing me. So without further ado, I'm going to talk about, kind of what sparked my aviation interest. It really didn't happen until I was in my 20s, although my sister did take me on a flight that my dad had given her for her birthday. One of his friends was a private pilot, and I think it was for my sister's 13th birthday. He gave her the choice of taking whoever she wanted flying with her, and she chose me, which was pretty amazing, considering I was probably kind of an asshole as a brother. But that's beside the point. She chose me. And then I didn't fly after that until probably around 1984 in Alaska. My dad and I were doing some different hunting adventures. And so I got to ride in an Otter on floats. I got to ride in a 206 on floats. I got to ride in a Widgeon. I don't think I did any Super Cub type flying. In fact, I know I didn't. My first memory, or I guess it's not really a first memory, but my first trip out to Lake Clark was in a Navajo, and it was an extremely bumpy ride through Lake Clark Pass that day. Anyway, it seemed extremely bumpy to me. And I was sitting right behind the pilot. I think it was Glenn Allsworth. And my dad was sitting next to me on the other side of the aisle. And I was about to lose my cookie. And I said to my dad, I'm not feeling very good. And he pointed out the window, and I don't know what he was pointing at. But it turned out he was actually pointing that we were right over the runway, that we were almost there. But it was too late. I mean, I was going to lose it. And he had he had a set of binoculars in a case. And I grabbed the set of binoculars from him, pulled the binoculars out of the case, and filled the binocular case up with my lunch, which happened to be, my mom had made this fabulous halibut spread for sandwiches. And then I had a huge piece of chocolate cake, which I'll tell you, it doesn't come up as good as it went down. Anyway, we land. I'm feeling better now that I'm on the ground. And Glenn gets off the airplane, and I'm like the first off. And as I walk off the airplane, I'm zipping up this binocular case that's just full of vomit. And there's a 55-gallon barrel with a cut top there, and I chuck it in the barrel. And he says, he goes, I really appreciate you not puking all over my airplane. And anyway, that was quite an adventure, that adventure. We were not the only hunters. It was actually a group from my dad's church. There was 13 of us, and I think we killed 15 caribou over the next week and a half. Anyway, that was my first real flying adventure. They flew us out in an Otter on floats. We landed on a lake out around the Lake the Mulchatna River area, and from there I was kind of hooked. I mean, I didn't know how I was ever going to be able to afford to fly. I was working at Fred Meyer making, I think, $9 an hour. And my girlfriend at the time was making $9 an hour. But, you know, it inspired me. As I'm recounting this story that I just told you, it actually wasn't the first time I ever did a hunt in Alaska. I think my first hunt in Alaska was also a caribou hunt. And we took a Mark Air to King Salmon. And I remember that flight because it felt like the airplane, it was actually my first ride in a big jet. And it felt like the airplane was sliding down the runway sideways. And so it's weird. We got into a Cherokee 6 the next day, and he flew us out to this lake that was frozen over, and he landed. And when you think about, you know, a bush type airplane, you don't think of a Cherokee 6, but that's what this guy was flying. And so he hauled us. There was, I believe, 4 of us total, and all of our gear out to this lake that was froze over, and it was just glass smooth. There was no snow on it. And, you know, not being a pilot, I didn't think anything about it. And we hunted for at least a week. One of the funny things is my dad, and it was well below zero. It was like minus 30 at night. I don't know what it was during the day, but it was very, very cold. But the funny part is my dad was a Fred Meyer manager, and he got like 100 tents from Fred Meyer Salvage. And then he made a bunch of good tents from those 100 tents. And he had a big garage sale for the church. And like it was kind of donated money for the church. And he kept some of the supposedly best ones for us, which... I don't think I'll let my dad choose the tent anymore. Anyway, he chose a tent. It turns out there was 3 of us. There was me, my dad, and his friend Bill Trulock. And he chose a 2-man tent for 3 of us. And he had cots for 2 of them. And so my dad and Bill Trulock, because they were older, they got the cots. And I got wedged between these 2 snoring old men. Well, they weren't even that old at the time. They were probably only 40. But to me, they were old because I was 20. But I was wedged between them. I could not even roll over in the middle of the night. And fortunately, back then, I could go all night long without having to piss. Because, you know, there was no way to get out of between them without, you know, them getting up. So in the mornings, the first day I realized that I couldn't get my boots back on unless I slept with them, because at night they would freeze solid and you couldn't get your feet back in them. So I would put my boots in the bottom of my sleeping bag, and then we would go out and we'd hunt all day. And I think we killed, I don't know, 3 or 4 caribou that trip. The part that I was kind of recalling was, the guy came back in this Cherokee 6 like a week later. Well, it had snowed 8, 10, 12 inches. I don't know exactly how much, but it had snowed considerably. So this glass smooth froze over lake was no longer glass smooth. It had snow on it. So he lands, taxis up, and he says, well, he goes, things have changed, obviously. He goes, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take you first, and we're going to try to grab 1 caribou, and we're going to see how that goes. And so because I was the lightest, I think I probably weighed 125 at the time, he chose me, and he put the caribou meat in the back and me in the front seat next to him. And off we go to the end of the lake, and he taxis back through his tracks, and he makes a run down the lake, and he gets about halfway, and he shuts the power down. He says, that's not going to work. So he continues to taxi to the end of the lake. He makes a turnaround, taxis back through his tracks, goes all the way back to the far end of the lake again. And this guy looks like Magnum PI. He's got this New York Yankees cap on. He's smoking a cigar, and he's got Ray-Ban sunglasses on, and he looks like Magnum PI, and he's big, tall guy. And so we taxi back down the end of the lake, and he firewalls it again, and we're going, and about, I don't know, it seemed he went a little bit further this time, and then he shut it down again. He's like, that's not going to work. So he taxis back down. He's like, well, I'm going to give it one more try. And at the end of the lake, it wasn't like it was just a lake with tundra off the end. There was a bank that he had to clear that was like 6 feet high. And, you know, you don't clear that bank, you're dead. And so he firewalls it again. We go flying down this lake. And it's like, man, is this thing going to break ground? I'm oblivious, really. I mean, I'm thinking, he's going to shut it down again. Nope, he keeps going. Finally, the airplane gets off the ground, and we clear that bank with not much to spare. And so he hauls me back to King Salmon, and then he basically hauls out each guy individually and then goes back for the gear individually because he's got nothing better to get it off the lake with. So anyway, that was probably my first real scary flying where I felt like, I'm not sure if that's how it's supposed to go. Around 1986, I moved back to Oregon with my new wife, and my neighbor across the street, I realize, is a private pilot, and he owns a retractable gear Mooney. And he invites me to go to the Rose Festival Air Show with him. So I go, and one of the airplanes that really caught my attention was the 8-place Sherpa, I believe. It might have been the 5-place, but anyway, it was a big airplane, and I was like, wow, that is amazing. I want to be able to fly something like that someday. And so I'm talking to my neighbor Jim and telling him, hey, what do I got to do to get my license? And he says, well, go out to Troutdale. He goes, you know, there's a bunch of different flight schools out there, and I'm sure you can find one that will take you on. So I basically, at that point in my life, I was self-employed. I had enough money that I could afford flight lessons, and I thought, I'm going to do this. So, but I was concerned because I was still really prone to air sickness. And I was thinking, you know, if this is what it's going to be every time I go flying, I don't know. But anyway, I decided I'm going to do this. So I go out to Troutdale and I get lined up with the Part 141 school, and I start doing the training. And I had this great instructor. His name was Richard Bailey, called him Dickie. And Richard was an old school type instructor, and he took me out and, you know, went through the paces, and over time I was like, okay, I can do this. I remember him getting out the day and saying, okay, you're ready to solo, and I was like, I am. Anyway, took the airplane around the patch, and he kept saying, go around again and go around again, and came back, and so that was my first soloing, and went on, you know, to finish my rating, and when I went to get my medical, I couldn't get my medical because I had a history of kidney stones. So I was like, oh crap, is this gonna completely derail this? Anyway, I decided I'm not gonna give up. I sent all my medical information to Oklahoma City, and after a few months I got back an answer, and they allowed me to have what they would say, I think at the time it said you qualify for a 3rd class medical certificate, and don't fly if you have a kidney stone. Well, who's going to fly if they have a kidney stone? I guarantee you're not flying if you got a kidney stone. Anyway, so I get my pilot's license around 1994, and I realize, you can't really do much renting an airplane. It's so restrictive. I did rent a few times and did a few trips, rented a Piper Arrow and took my family to California, and I rented a Cessna 172 RG and flew over to Yakima with my family, and but in the end I just was like, I gotta buy my own airplane, because, you know, just going out and burning fuel there's not much you can do when you rent an airplane. And I really didn't know about off-airport flying at that point. It wasn't even really in my, I wasn't focused on, getting an airplane that could do off-airport flying. That wasn't actually in my mind. More so was an airplane that I could possibly, fly to somewhere where I could camp with my family. And so I was talking to my neighbor Jim about, the kind of airplane that I could buy and do that kind of stuff with, that would haul my daughter and my wife and all of our gear. And he mentions a Cessna 180, and I started looking at Cessna 180s, and it was just too expensive for me to afford to buy a Cessna 180. And then he mentioned a mall, and I started looking at malls, and I found an M5 235C, November 6269er Mike, which was owned originally by a guy, his name was Rod Anderson, and he did a kids TV show that I was actually on when I was in the first grade called Ramblin' Rod. And I decided to buy the airplane. It was 1,200 hours total time, 1978, and this was 1999, so it had really low hours for the year it was. And the person that had owned it most recent was afraid of it. It scared him. He'd almost ground looped it. And so he stopped flying it. He was basically just paying to annual it for the last 3 years. So I bought that airplane and then realized, I need a tailwheel endorsement and I need at least 25 hours for the insurance company to insure me. So I called Richard Bailey, the instructor that I really trusted, and he started flying with me. He actually helped me get them all home, and then he started flying with me. And I think at 10 hours, he said, "Oh, you're good to go." And I really didn't feel like I was good to go. I really never felt like I was a natural at piloting. It always felt kind of foreign to me. I always felt really confident in a car, like getting sideways in a car or getting sideways on a dirt bike. But an airplane was a whole new mechanical thing that I really hadn't felt like I had even come close to, manipulating properly. In fact, I'd scared myself quite badly a few times. I'd put the airplane in a spin early on. I'd put the airplane in a spin trying to do stalls because I was uncoordinated. And fortunately, I got myself out of the spin, but I really don't know how I did it. And so then I took the instructor up with me and had him do spin training with me until I felt confident that I could get this airplane out of a spin if I put it in a spin. But I'm kind of jumping all over. Anyway, I finally got basically checked out in the mall. I had my 25 hours and I was kind of testing myself, testing my limits. I would go out and fly in different weather conditions. And I remember one day I was coming back and some thunderstorms had kind of moved in, and I basically ended up at Troutdale about the same time this thunderstorm was moving through. And I tried getting the airplane down on the runway a number of times. I mean, like each time I was like all out of sorts, and I was just thinking, this is nuts. And I finally, I think on the fourth attempt, I'd go around. The airplane had enough power. If I get really out of sorts, I just add the power to it and go around. And on the fourth attempt, I finally got it down and stopped. And I remember the guy in the tower going, "Man, I was white knuckle for you." And I pushed it back into the hangar that day, and I was just thinking, man, is this maybe I should just sell this thing. This is maybe not the the thing I should be doing for fun. It's eventually maybe going to kill me. But I stuck with it, and I eventually met a couple Cub guys. I was flying around down towards some islands that the Cub guys were playing on, and I saw them landed there, and I decided to come in and land with the mall. And I had done some very minor off-airport landings at that point. Well, I'd wrecked the airplane trying to do an off-airport landing. That's a whole nother story. But so I'd wrecked the airplane, rebuilt it. I was working on kind of honing my skills at off airport, but I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any friends that were into off airport flying. But I came in and I landed at the big strip on Cottonwood, and I thought, wow, I did amazing. And I met one of the Cub guys there, and his name's Tim Randall. And I convinced him to take me for a ride in his PA-14, I believe it was. And he showed me what his PA-14 could do, and he was telling me the whole time that it still wasn't a Cub. A Cub would be even more amazing. But he landed crossways at the pond on Cottonwood Island, and it just blew me away. And then I thought, well, maybe I can do it in the mall. And so then I came back around. I took off and came back around, and I actually did it in the mall because I had seen somebody else do it. I knew that it could be done. And so I started flying a little bit with Tim Randall, and over the next few months, somehow he convinced Lonnie to fly with me some. And so I became very good friends with Lonnie Habersetzer, who at the time, he was the most amazing Cub pilot that I'd ever seen. To this day, I think he's probably still the most amazing Cub pilot out there. He spends every waking moment he can in the seat of a Cub, and has for the last 25 years. So naturally, you're going to get good at something. Anyway, I started following Lonnie around with my M5, and pretty soon I realized there's a big difference between an M5 and a Super Cub. The size of the wing, the speed at which I landed at, the 6-cylinder Lycoming up front versus the 4-cylinder Lycoming that a Cub has. And it was oftentimes very precarious. The only way I could get into the places that Lonnie was getting into was using massive amount of braking power, which then translated to a dance between keeping the tail down and going up on your nose. And fortunately, over the next few years, I managed to keep the airplane intact. But I was thinking the whole time, I need a better platform. This doesn't work. But I wanted a platform that I could involve my family with. So I had the idea of building an experimental maul with the biggest wings Maul ever built, with a 4-cylinder Lycoming engine and a big fixed pitch 90-inch prop. Well, actually, it was an 84-inch prop originally. And so I went to the FAA, and initially the FAA told me I couldn't do it. And then I got a hold of a guy at the Hillsboro FSDO. His name was Michael Robinson. I believe that's his name. And he told me I could. He came out and looked at what I was presenting, and said that he didn't see a problem with it. And so over the next couple of years, I built Bushwhacker, which ended up being the airplane I flew in the video Big Rocks, Long Props, Volume 1 with Lonnie in his Super Cub Driver 749er. And we ended up making, I don't know, we sold thousands of those videos. I don't know exactly how many, but we sold a lot of them. And that became, I guess, my claim to fame. Over a period of time, I continued honing my skills, flying off airport, meeting more interesting people. I met Paul Claus, who invited me to come up to Alaska and learn how to fly straight skis with a Super Cub one winter. And I met Kirk Ellis at some point, and he invited me out to his lodge, and I ended up doing moose hunting at his lodge, and just have met a lot of great people in this flying community that have freely given their time and helped me become a better pilot. Well, I know this format may not be for everyone, but I ended up doing what I could with this video I took. there was probably, this day, there was probably, I don't know, the water was low. So there's at least 15 places that I looked at that I probably could have landed if I really wanted to. The rocks are really big up here. And at this point in my flying, I really don't want to land on big rocks anymore. Not the big rocks that bush wheels are capable of, because not only are they capable of landing on them, but they're capable of picking up a rock, bigger than a basketball and chucking it at your horizontal, which means then you're going to have to fix your airplane. And so these days, I look for the smooth spots, the rocks that are softball size or maybe a little bit bigger are kind of my sweet spot. Sandy beaches are nice because you're not going to tear up your tail feathers on those. So anyway, I like to push the limits, but I hate working on my airplane. I would rather keep my airplane nice than go into a gravel bar that I know I could land, but there's the possibility that one of those rocks is going to get picked up by that 35 and just chucked at the horizontal. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a comment down below if you liked it. Leave a comment down below if you didn't like it. We'll see you next time.